Hello, it's me, Joe, aka Concrete Dog, and I thought I'd try this, seeing as we're all kind of in weird lockdown times. Hope everybody's well out there. I thought we'd take a look at Inkscape. It's something that I was delivering some workshops on recently at this cool makerspace I was working at in North Wales called Fuse, and it's something I've used for a few years. I'm not like an Inkscape guru, but it's useful for lots of different things. So to get started, if you Google Inkscape and download it, it's free, which is always good, and it's not free as in beer, it's free as in speech. It's open source, so it's been developed by a community, so as such it's got some really funky, cool things that it can do that probably other drawing programs can't do. Why else would you want to use Inkscape? Well, quite often in makerspaces you'll have bits of kit that are driven directly by Inkscape, such as vinyl cutters or laser cutters or printers and stuff like that. So it can be really useful to work directly with stuff. But also, and one of the problems, well, not a problem, one of the things that we had at the Fuse makerspace is that, for example, the laser cutter there could only be driven off CorelDRAW, and we only had one paid license for CorelDRAW, so there was only one machine with it on, and so getting people to work in Inkscape, bring their files in, which we can then convert and open up in CorelDRAW, means that we don't have queues of people waiting to work on that machine. So yeah, it's a really funky bit of software. We're not going to go through every aspect of it, but when you open it up, you'll get something that looks like this. We've got a page here. First things first, if you go to File and click Document Properties, there's a few things we can look at in here. If it's the first time you've run it, for some reason it tends to default to making measurements in pixels, so you might want to change that to centimetres or inches if you're used to working in imperial, or millimetres indeed. You can set it to different sort of paper sizes, A4, A3, A2 and US ones. You can flip it to be portrait or landscape in here, and then we've got some other things where we can, for example, later on after we've drawn something, using this resize the page to the content that we've drawn can be quite useful, etc, etc, and we can change the background colours and stuff like that. There's other things that we'll come back to perhaps later in the series about grids and guides and stuff like that, but for now let's leave that there, and let's close that. So moving about, there's a couple of things. If I hold I'm on a laptop with a trackpad, but if I hold the center button of the trackpad down, that allows me to then move the page around, and what else? Zooming, that's another thing that people get. Sometimes people zoom in so far that they get a bit lost and they don't know where they are on the page, but when you have this zoom tool selected, zoom tool, that's hard to say, if you click this button, zoom to fit, that will be any selected object will fit in the window, but if you click this one, zoom to fit page in the window, you'll return to having the page there. So there's lots and lots of stuff. Some of it's pretty self-explanatory. There's text tools. There are some sort of primitive drawing tools. Primitive as in draw primitive shapes. So for example, we have a square drawing shape, which I should have set up earlier. So currently I've just drawn a square, but you can't see it, and that's because probably I have the fill and the stroke set to not be there at all. So that leads nicely on to the first thing that we can perhaps say about objects. So all objects that you create, if they're like a sort of complete object, as in they have a sort of boundary all the way around the object, will have a couple of components. They've got a path that goes all the way around the outside, and on that path you can apply a stroke. So the stroke here is well, it's red, but I'm just going to change the stroke to a hideous shade of there we go, a sort of light blue. So the outside edge of this box is the stroke. That is the sort of the attributes that we've applied to the path which forms the outside of the box. So to change those attributes, I've gone to Object, scroll down to Fill and Stroke, and when I've clicked that, it's given me this box here. Now this box here will actually stay, and even if I close down Inkscape and reopened it, that box would still be there. You can minimize this bit by clicking on this little arrow button, and you can remove this dock by clicking on the close button, and then you would have to go back and open it again. But as you add more things, so for example later on we're going to open up align and distribute, they sort of get added in a stack. So fill and stroke is still here, but it's now also joined by align and distribute, which can be sort of raised to the top and lowered. So back on fill and stroke, we've drawn a square by selecting this square tool and left clicking and pulling out, and we've drawn a square. So as you saw when I first did it, you can turn off various different points. So the fill is the colour that's inside. So if we click the X, it will turn off the fill. If we select this other one and go back and do the same again, click the X and it turns off the fill. If we turn the fill back on, we can obviously change the colour. And all these different objects, different sort of buttons here, are just different ways that you can kind of select colours. You could also use like RGBA codes and type them in to get different colours and set transparency and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's fill. Stroke is similar. You can change the stroke colour. So I'm changing the attributes of the what's laid on this path here, and you can also change the stroke sort of style. So you can change the size of it, so you can make it down to 0, you can make it much bigger, you can do things like change the way that corners are handled, and you can even like change it to dotted and you know, different sort of types of lines that form the outside stroke of an object. So that's fill and stroke, and that applies across whether you're using the like the square primitive tool or the circle primitive tool. Another thing about these sort of primitive shape tools is, oh, that's an accident, don't know why I clicked that, just missed. If you for example have the circle tool, and let's set the stroke to something a bit more sensible, like 1mm. So if I draw another circle here, actually let's zoom out a bit as well. So that's an interesting one. If you click zoom and then you right click, use the right mouse button, you zoom out, and left zooms you in. So I'm going to use the circle tool. Now if I click left click and start to drag to make a sort of circle, you can see that I'm making an ellipse, and as I move the mouse around it creates different types of circles or ellipses. If I definitely wanted to draw a circle, what I'm doing now is I'm holding down the control key and I'm drawing my mouse down at a sort of 45-degree angle, and it constrains it to an exact circle. So that's a way that you can draw a circle. If you want your circle to be, and this works as well for squares and other objects, if you want your circle to be a particular size, you can select it and you can actually type in some sizes into these dialog boxes up here. If it's a perfect circle and you want it to maintain its aspect ratio so that it always stays a circle, if you click this lock button, then if you change the width, it will automatically change the height to match, so it stays a perfect circle. So if we make it 60mm, you can see it's changed. When I change the width, it's changed the height to a perfect 60mm. That's the same with squares. If this is locked, actually interestingly it doesn't matter what the shape is. If you let's get rid of that and let's just draw a little rectangle instead. So if you have a rectangle and you select it using this tool, so we can see now that it's 43.989mm wide and it's 17.549mm high, and this aspect is locked. So if I change this to 60mm, it will calculate the proportion to make the dimensions comparatively the same at the new size. So if I put 60 in, we will see the 70.549 increase somewhat, but the aspect ratio of the same has of the objects has stayed the same. That's useful if you're resizing like an entire object or a collection of objects, or later on if we looked at like I don't know, bringing another image in and you wanted to scale it up by an but keep the ratios the same so it didn't sort of look stretched out and stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of primitive stuff. Oh, so another thing up here is you can use the X and Y coordinates to change the location of an object. So for example, if we let's just make this a known height rather than a known width. So I've just made this rectangle 25 millimeters high. Okay, say we wanted to place this object exactly sort of on the top line of this. We could do this various ways, but one way is we could work out where this wall was using the coordinates. So at the moment this is placed, the bottom left hand corner of this is placed at 90 millimeters across on the x-axis relative to the page, and 77.299 millimeters up on the y-axis. So if we just change those to more sort of rounded amounts, we'll change it to 90 and 80, so it won't move very much. Okay, so we know that this is now sort of 80 millimeters up from the bottom of the page to this bottom object, and we know that this object is 25 millimeters high. So if we wanted to put this object on the top line of that, one way that we could do it is we could say, okay, then we want the y value to be 80 plus 25, we want it to be 105 millimeters, and you can see that that now just touches the edge of the outside of those two lines, just touch, and they're aligned. Obviously you can select an object and you can drag it. When it's got the little cross next to the cursor, that means you can drag it. If you click the object again and these tags change, you can now rotate the object. Might be easier if I show you with this. So you can rotate objects. You can change, again, you can use the control key to constrain the changes, so you can set things directly at sort of 45 degrees, 90 degrees. I think it shifts in increments of 15 degrees. Oh yeah, you can see if you watch here on this bottom line, you can see as I scroll it says rotate 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, from the original point. Yeah, what else can we do? Okay, let's get rid of these two and let's play with one of the things we quite often want to do. I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller. So when you have an object selected and you can grab any of these little arrows and you can pull them to make the object smaller or larger. If you use the corner ones again, it will maintain the aspect ratio. So say for example we wanted to draw something that looked like this, but really exactly a bit like one of those old railway signs, you know, that you see that have a sort of rounded bit in the middle and a square sign with a name on. So but you wanted to do it really accurately. So one way that you could line these two up is you could just do it by eye, and that might be fine, but an accurate way to do it is to use the align and distribute tools, which we opened earlier. If you haven't opened them, they're under the objects, align and distribute, which we've got here. So when you look in this, you'll see these various kind of align icons here, but the one to consider first is this relative to. On this drop down you have last selected, first selected, biggest, smallest, page, drawing, selection area. Let's leave it as the last selected. Okay, unselect everything, and then I'm going to select this, and then I'm going to hold the shift key and select this one, and now this rectangle is the last object selected. So relative to this object, if I click this button, the circle should move across to be on the same central line as the center of the rectangle. There we go. If I now click this one, it should do the same thing, but it will move the circle down to be shared across the central line that runs through the center of the rectangle. There we go. So now these two things are perfectly aligned with each other. So yeah, that's that. Another thing we can do is say we wanted to make this sign, and we can do this with all the types of sort of primitives that we use to make shapes, is if I select both of these and then go to path and well, I'm going to click union, but there's actually a few of these. So there's union, difference, intersection, exclusion, division, cut, path, combine, break apart. But these from division up to union are quite interesting. They're called Boolean operations, and basically, so union, what it's going to do is hopefully it will add the two objects together and disregard anything that's inside them. So that should give us our sort of old railway sign type thing. There we go. So clicking union, you can see what it's done. It's unioned the two shapes, but got rid of the stuff on the, in between. I'm going to press Control and Z to just undo that, to just show you what the other ones do. So if we go into difference, oh, I should have them selected. Hang on. Let me select them both. There we go. And then do path difference. So difference gives you everything that's on the outside of the objects. Select them both again and do hold shift to select them both, then go path and go intersection. So intersection gives you only the bits are left where both things overlap, and then I've never found a way to sort of describe these other than getting people to play with two objects. Division does that. It gives you sort of everything that's in the inside. Yeah, it does that. There we go. Good if you want to draw a tennis ball in this instance. So yeah, let's do a union again and get back to that. Okay, so that's that. What else do I want to show you? Oh, there are other ways of creating lines and shapes. So another shape tool that we've got is this one, which is the polygons or stars. So you can switch between polygons here and stars here, and you can set the number of corners. So say we wanted to draw a hexagon, we would turn that down to 9, select it on the polygon one, and there we go, we can draw kind of hexagons. If we draw a star with 6 points, you can obviously guess it's going to draw a star. There are things like spiral generators, which have lots of kind of cool patterns to print, but there's lots of parameters you can play with, so they're quite good to just tinker around and fiddle with things. But perhaps a more useful one if you're designing sort of objects is this one, which is the Bezier curves and straight line tool. So if you have this object and you left click and then drag, you can draw, and then left click again, it begins to draw lines. You can keep moving and left clicking as much as you want, and it's only when you do a double click that it will finish the object and actually draw the line. Again, you can use fill and stroke. In this case there's no fill, but you can change the stroke style of the line to colors and different thicknesses, etc, etc. If you use this tool and you draw a shape, and then you on the last one you double click, when you're hovering over the first point, it will create a finished object, which then, if it's finished and all the like corners are joined up, you can use the fill tool to once again kind of fill it and create a sort of object that you can have filled with stuff. I was going to say gradients and things like that, which is kind of cool, and I didn't mention earlier. So yeah, there we go. That's some basics for now. I'm not sure we're going to go too much further in this one because it's getting a bit of a long video already, but one of the great things, just to finish off on, one of the great reasons that I love Inkscape is because it's been built by the community, people have built all kinds of things into it. So for example, I wrote a whole series I wrote an article in Hackspace magazine about kind of how this plugin called SVG to Shenzhen allows people to make like PCBs in Inkscape. There's stuff about G-code, which is basically you can use Inkscape to generate kind of code for use by sort of CNC machines and stuff like that. But what I wanted to show you just quickly was there are some cool things, like one of the classic ones is the gear generator. So under extensions render gear, this is a very cool thing. It gives you this dialogue, number of teeth. I want more teeth than that. Let's see what that does. There's basically various parameters, but when you click it, it does a little bit of work, and then it draws a gear for you. Really cool if you're into sort of laser cutting and want to kind of do stuff with gearboxes and things like that. Really handy, and there's lots and lots of different things to play with. Certainly under this render tab, there are things like foldable box generators, Hershey text, which is you can put in some text and apply it, and it will give you the text on the screen. What's interesting about it is that this text is all made out of one path, which means that a CNC machine can replicate it really kind of well. So yeah, there's loads and loads of things. Don't worry if you don't understand that last thing I was waffling about. But yeah, there's loads and loads of things. You can generate spirograph stuff, loads and loads of stuff you can kind of play with. So yeah, download Inkscape, have a little play, and ping me some questions at Concrete Dog if you've got any sort of things that you'd like me to cover in a future video. That'll do for now. Ta-ta! Take care.